Well, good morning, Ohio. Welcome to Real Estate Law, Module 5, Day 3. You're now in the last 50% of the class for pre-licensed law. For those of you that are new here, welcome. My name is Andrew Show, S-H-O-W, just like TV and movies. And for those of you that are a repeat classmates of ours, great. Glad to have you all here. For those of you that have been here for more than one of the sessions, some of what I'm going to say in the beginning is more of a repeat, but I do want to cover some things because we do have some students that are new here for the first time, and I want to cover that. Make sure you have your real estate law book. Make sure you take notes, either on a sheet of paper next to it or in your book. It is meant to be used. It is not meant to be pristine and then sold on eBay when you're done. Although if you want to, you can. If you look on page III of your textbook, and by the way, we are in the new 15th edition of Ohio Real Estate Law. If you have a previous edition, it is not going to work because the new textbook, the sequences have changed dramatically. The content has actually improved, and you will not be able to follow along. So on page III, you've got module 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're in 5, page 141 in your textbook. So if you go to page 141, chapter 11, real property law. That's where we're going to be. And throughout the morning session, we will cover chapters 11, 12, and 13. We have a lot of material to cover. And then this afternoon, if you're going to be here with us, we have 2 chapters to cover. So some basic things here. If you're new to Zoom, if you move your mouse down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see a horizontal toolbar that'll pop up at the bottom. In the far left corner, you'll see a microphone icon. It says audio, and it should be off. All of you are muted when you enter into the classroom. So if you want to say something, ask a question, get a clarification, disagree with me, whatever it might be, click that and you'll unmute yourself and you can then ask your question. Next to that is the video icon. Now, a word of caution. We have a live stream administrator that will be monitoring the class today, as we do with all of our classes, all the pre-licensed classes. You need to be in the camera, in the frame, so we can see you. I don't want to see your dog, or we can see your dog and cat, but you have to be in the picture with your dog and cat. We don't want to look at the ceiling. We need to see your face because we have to be able to prove to the Ohio Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing that you actually attended the class. So that's real important because there's no sense being here if you're not going to get credit for the class. In the middle of the toolbar, there'll be a chat icon. You need to click that, and then a chat window will pop up on your screen. You can make the chat to where it will post something either to me as a host or moderator or to everyone. Make sure you select everyone so that if you have a question or concern, you can express it so that all of us can see that, and then we can address that. Also, we will have occasional quizzes during the course of the material. Now, we want you to answer the quizzes. Now, we would like you to answer them correctly, but the goal here is participation, not grading. So we're not grading your quiz answers. Some students who aren't paying much attention will wait till the very end and see what everybody else answers, and then they'll answer. Okay, well, be bold. Be one of the first ones that answers. And if you're wrong, do it with gusto. Be bold with your wrong answer, okay? But the idea here, in other words, don't be scared if you make a mistake. It's not a problem. We're not grading the answer. We're grading the participation. And Kaylee joined us. Kaylee is one of our live stream administrators. She's outstanding. She'll be monitoring the class. She just dropped something into chat. So make sure you read that and review it. Make sure you understand it. And we've got some real interesting topics to discuss. Now, again, my name is Andrew Show, S-H-O-W. I'm a real estate buyer broker in the Metro Columbus area. I will be starting my 35th year in real estate starting in May. I attended the Hondros College of Real Estate back in 1992, way before all of you were even born, or at least most of you anyway. And I'm sitting in the same chair that you sat in. And I had some great professors that taught the course. And today we still have great adjunct professors. Adjunct means simply part-time, that teach the material, that teach the course. And we are blessed with great instructors here in Ohio with Hondros. So before we get started, before I share the screen, does anybody have a question or comment at all? Or are you even awake? Have you had your caffeine?
We're awake.
Okay. Well, thanks, Amanda. Appreciate that. At least we got one of you awake. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me share this screen. Now, just a comment here. When I share my screen with you, and here we go. Now on my screen, on my laptop, I have a monitor and a laptop. My monitor is to my right, which will be me looking to your left. And that's what you see. On my laptop, which is all of 17.3 inches diagonally, that's my real estate field to look at. I have the PowerPoint, I have the Zoom platform, I have the participant list, and I have the chat. And then I get 5 pictures of you. Now, I don't get to see all of you at the same time, unfortunately. But I'll see 5 of you. And your names are in very small little print with small little pictures on the right side of my monitor. So if you have a question, and let me back up a second. So part of the Zoom platform is in the middle, besides that chat window, is a React button. And if you click the React button, you'll see one of the options is to raise hand, which will put a little yellow hand next to your face, indicating that you want to make a comment or ask a question or what have you. Well, I only see 5 of you at a time. So if you raise your hand, and I don't see it, it's not that I'm trying to ignore you, it's just that I'm not noticing it or seeing it. So if you raise your hand and then I don't see it, then either unmute yourself or jump up and down, or maybe if someone else that's on the call can see you and then say, hey, Cassandra's got a raised hand here, get with her and go from there. That is another way to try to get my attention. But sometimes I don't see it just because I'm only seeing 5 of you students at a time out of the, see how many we got, 32 students this morning. Got a fairly big class. So having said that, let's go ahead and start. We are now into page 141, 142. So here's what we're going to cover this morning. Law, property interests, and then we're going to touch on landlord-tenant law, which is almost a completely different world of real estate. Many of you will go into residential real estate. Some of you will go into commercial, and some of you will do property management. If you're going to do property management, you're going to need to know the Ohio landlord-tenant law chapter backwards and forwards. And understand that Ohio only issues one real estate license. It's good for any piece of land between Lake Erie and the Ohio River. But each type of practice is very different from another. You still need to pass the same test, you still have the same license, but they are quite different. So those are our topics for this morning's session. And of course, the state of Ohio requires you to pass with a 70% passing rate. And of course, Hondros also requires you to pass with a 70% passage rate. When you're done with this course and your attendance is recorded, Your student portal will then have a law icon with your class materials, and then it will give you the option, your be able to take the test icon is activated. Now, don't rush out and take the test if you're not prepared. If you're under stress, if you didn't sleep well, you got something else to do, take care of business first. Take care of yourself first. All right? Because you're going to have to pass it with a 70% score. And if you don't, then you have to take it again and again and again till you get at least 70%. Now, if you're struggling to get 70% or you're scoring in the mid to low 70s, I don't think you're ready to take the state exam as part of the law course. When you take the real course test, the state examination, your physiological stress factor is going to go higher. It's just human nature. So if you're scoring in the 80s and 90s, great. If not, you're not prepared, in my opinion. And every time you take the test and fail, it's another $81 to take the test over again. So save your money, take it one time and pass it. The division tells us that about 35% of the students that take the exam the first time do not pass the exam. That means about 65% do pass the exam. Now, the good news is that it requires a 70% score, which out of 120 questions on the state examination, you can miss 36 questions and still pass the state test. And throughout today, I'll give you my test taking tips as I try to with every live stream class that I teach and live class that I teach to help you achieve that goal. Of course, if you do have other questions or concerns, you can always send an email to askaninstructor@hondros.com, and they'll be able to get back with you within about a 24-hour time frame. Also, you've got our customer support people. You've got Terry, you've got Stacy, you've got Melanie. You've got great people that can take care of you if you've got a question. Either contact them on the 800 number or go send a chat through the Hondros website. And one thing I will recommend to all of you, some of you have already signed up for the Sales Grammar Review course. I did in 1992. I wanted to get the textbook to be able to study. If you don't take the Sales Grammar Review course, you then have to study all 4 of your textbooks for all 4 of your core subjects, which is fine. You can do that. You don't need to take the Sales Grammar Review course. But if you want to condense a book that just focuses on the exam only, the Sales Grammar Review books are great. And now, today, they are 2 thin books. One's on the national portion and one's on the state portion. So you have a choice. You can either take the grammar review and get the 2 thin books and focus your exam studies on that, or focus on all 4 of your textbooks and do it that way. But I took the Sales Grammar Review course in 92 because I wanted to get the book. Now, how does it actually work? Well, you take a virtual examination starting at 7 o'clock in the morning or whenever you log in, and you've got up to 3 hours to take it. It will cover all 4 of your subjects. Then you'll have a half hour to an hour or more for lunch. And if you get done with the exam, you're done. You don't have to just wait there. If you get done in 2 hours, you're done. But you'll come back at noon, either live or live stream, and then the instructor will go through and review every single question and all the answers and what's the right answer and the logic as to why it's the right answer. It is a great review. Now, the grammar review course, the test itself doesn't change. It's static. You can take it up to 3 times if you wish. I don't think there's a benefit to taking it 3 times. I think the benefit is you take it 1 time, you get the textbooks, study those, then take the test, and then go through with the instructor and your other fellow students as to why the answers are the way they are, and then continue to focus on their textbooks. That would be my recommendation. But you can take it up to 3 times. Now, if you fail the state examination, They have a question bank of 5,000 questions, and each one has 4 answers. So there's 20,000 answers with 5,000 questions, and every time you take the examination, you'll get a different exam. The core subjects will be the same, but the specific questions will always change every time. But our Kramer review course, the test is the same test. It doesn't change one time to the next time. There's also the CompuCram exam tool on your website, on your student portal. If you have that option as part of your package, there's a 100% passage guarantee as part of that. And it also helps you understand what areas you're strong in, as well as what areas you're weak in. So now let's get into real property law. So here's our overview. And every chapter we have in all of our textbooks has an overview. So that's sort of an introduction as to why we're going to talk about what we're going to cover. And at the end, this is hopefully the goals that we're going to have. You're going to be able to identify real property versus personal property and talk about appurtenances, air rights, water rights, mineral rights, subsurface rights, things like that. So how is property classified? Now we're on page 141 and 142. So how is property classified? Well, first off, there's real property, which means the land and everything attached to it. A mailbox that's mounted in the ground is real property. The fence in your yard is real property. The driveway, the sidewalk, the home, the factory, the restaurant, the strip center, whatever it is real property. So what's personal property? Well, it's everything that's not real property. That's one way to figure out what it is. Another term that we use for personal property is the word chattel, C-H-A-T-T-E-L. That's just a legal term for personal property. So your table lamp in your home is chattel. Your refrigerator that's plugged into the outlet in the refrigerator cavity in your kitchen is personal property. Another word besides chattel is personal T, and that's how it's pronounced, personal T. If you have an electric range in your oven, in your kitchen, that's considered personal property. It's chattel or personal T. So you got to know the difference between what is real property and what is personal property.
You said
Now,
a range like for your oven?
yeah, electric range, gas range. Is the word stove, is that a better term?
So even though, well, like like if it's built into the island, wouldn't
Oh,
that
no,
be
that's different. That's all right. So
okay?
Amanda's asking a really great question. So what if it's a built-in appliance? What about that? Well, a built-in appliance becomes real property. So a built-in microwave, if it's a countertop microwave, it's personal property. If it's a microwave that's built over the range, where it's built into the cabinetry, and it has a little range hood or vent hood as part of the microwave, that's real property. In some higher end homes, there are refrigerators that cost as much as a small car. And they are built into the home. They are bolted in. So as Amanda pointed out, a wall oven, things like that. Or it could be an in countertop cooktop. That is real property. Now, I don't know too many built-in washers and dryers. I guess there could be, but I don't know of any. But certainly there are built-in refrigerators, there are built-in ovens, there are built-in microwaves. convection microwaves, convection ovens. I have in my home a stainless steel covered gas double oven, and the lower oven is a convection oven, and it has a 5-burner gas cooktop. But you plug it into the wall outlet, you plumb it with the gas line, and it's a piece of still personal property, because I can disconnect the gas line and shut it off, and I can unplug the power outlet, and I can slide it right out. So does that answer your question, Amanda? Okay, great question. Thank you for asking. Hopefully all of you understand it. And again, if you've got questions, feel free to chime in here. So we talk about the bundle of rights. And if you look at this picture, and it's on page 142 of your textbook, it looks kind of weird. Those are supposed to be sticks. They may not be the world's best looking sticks, but that's what they're supposed to represent. And we call it a bundle of rights or a bundle of sticks. So one of the bundles of sticks is possession. You can enjoy the property. That's another stick. You can dispose of the property. You can give it away. You can sell it. You could let a family member inherit it or through a will. You could donate. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could do with disposition. Exclusion means you can have the right to keep people off of your property, which goes back to kind of that quiet enjoyment stick. And you have the right to control the property within the proper legal methods and zoning and so forth. If you're on the approach path to John Glenn Columbus International Airport, and the zoning says you can't have more than a 3-story apartment building or a 3-story office building, you're not going to build a 10-story building because of the flight path. So these are the bundle of sticks or the bundle of rights that goes with ownership. Now, do you need to know these? Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Let's continue. So what can interfere with your bundle of rights or your bundle of sticks? Well, one of them is called trespassing. Now, this is where somebody, walks into your property or walks onto your land or runs or whatever, but they're not supposed to be there. That's considered to be a trespass. Now, if you look at the little graph there on the right column of page 142, or if you look at your screen, you'll see the little stick figure running into the green space. That's a trespass. Well, what about an encroachment? Well, an encroachment is something that is encroaching into your property, but it's fixed. So, for example, maybe the neighbor builds a garage very close to the property line, and they didn't get a survey, and they didn't really do it right, or maybe they didn't use a good contractor to figure out where the property line is, and they built the garage 6 inches into your property. That's considered an encroachment. And then the other type is called a nuisance. Now, a nuisance is beyond your property boundary. If you're living near the Ohio State University campus, and it's a football Saturday afternoon in Columbus, and you're probably going to hear some noise, some exuberant students that are going to be yelling and cheering and probably drinking and who knows what else. And you can hear the noise and it's irritating to you. That's a nuisance. It's beyond your property boundary, but you can hear it or you can see it. That would be considered a nuisance. Anheuser-Busch has a major brewery here in Columbus. And for years after they built it, you could smell the hops as they were brewing Anheuser-Busch beer. And it was very pungent. And when the wind typically blows from west to east, and you'd smell it having it drift over the freeway, on I-270. That's a nuisance. Now they've done something to the beer or to the process of beer, and now you don't smell it. But for a long time, it was definitely smelly. So those are the three types of things that could interfere with your quiet enjoyment of the property and so forth. So again, a little bit more of a definition. There's trespass. Now, if somebody trespasses, can you stop them and say, turn around and walk out of here or leave? Sure. But you're not going to have them go to court over it unless it causes damage. So if somebody comes into your property and damages your trees or damages your flowers or damages something on your property, it's not considered actionable. But what about an encroachment? So if somebody were to build a garage that encroaches into your side of the property, you could say to them, hey, your garage is in my property. We need you to move it. And you could force them to move the garage. Now, if it goes on for 21 consecutive years, even if the ownership changes, but that garage is there and nobody notices it or nobody really cares about it, and after 21 years, you can't force them to move it. So, and we'll have an example of how that might work a little bit later in the course today. So if you've got somebody that's encroaching into your property, you need to object to it. And even if you sell the property to somebody else, and then they sell to somebody else, they sell to somebody else, if 21 consecutive years goes by and nobody objects to the encroachment, once 21 years goes by, you can't force them to pick up the property or pick up the encroachment and move it. It's grandfathered in. It's called easement by prescription. So what about a nuisance? It's external, beyond your property lines. Now, again, can you tolerate a few hours of noisy, youthful people around the campus area? Yeah, probably. I don't. If you're going to buy there, you need to know that they're going to do that kind of stuff, and as part of the campus environment. But if it's ongoing and unreasonable, then it is a serious issue. So what happens if the county decides to build a landfill 300 feet from your property? Well, that could be an issue, obviously. So there are some remedies for nuisance, but it's probably the one that has the least amount of public action against it because it's harder to prosecute from what the prosecutor's office has told us here in Franklin County. Now, what about the attachments? And you've got on the next page a little cone on 143, and there it shows an improvement and the surface, which is the green space, and then all the stuff underneath it going down to the core of the earth. So everything below the grass, if that's grass, is considered subsurface. But what about above the grass, above the improvement? You have the air rights. And theoretically, they go up to outer space. But if your zoning says you can't go higher than 2 stories, then that's as tall as you can build your improvement. Now, can you charge United and Delta and Southwest and American $1 for every time an airplane flies over your home? No. You don't have that right to bill them for $1 every time an aircraft flies over your property. That's not reasonable. But in theory, you do own the air within what's allowed by zoning. for your property. And everything underneath the ground, which theoretically goes down to a point at the core of the earth, is yours. So if there's minerals, there's coal or gas or oil. I don't know too many people know how that have found diamonds under their ground, but if there was, or gold or whatever, some precious metal, that you could extract that and that would be yours. So what are attachments? And we're now still on page 143, 144. So attachments are things connected to the land, both natural and man-made. So in my backyard, I've got 12 mature trees. Now, I thought it was great to get a wooded lot when I built our home in 93. And then I didn't really think about the issue of leaves in the fall that shed from the tree. And then I got to rake them and bag them and cut them up with my mulching mower from basically September, October, November, and sometimes even into December, depending on how fast the leaves are shed from the trees. So I get my aerobic activity that way, at least one of my aerobic activities, because I've got to take care of the leaves. But the point of it is those trees were naturally there. They were there before the house was, they were there before the subdivision was even developed. So that's a natural attachment. Now, of course, a home is man-made. It is added to the property, but they are attachments. And they are generally classified as real property. If you've got a small farm, for example, and maybe you've got a natural vineyard of grapes that grew up naturally, a lot of up near Lake Erie, there's a lot of little vineyards up there. If those grape plants had been there naturally, that's still real property. Which takes us to our next slide, which talks about fructus naturalis and fructus industrialis. Now, what the heck is this? Well, there's two types of plants that can grow on land. Well, there's actually lots of plants that can grow on land, but the point of it is fructus naturalis means things that are growing naturally without human intervention. Humans didn't plant it. It was just there. A stand of trees, evergreens, pine trees, deciduous trees, whatever it might be. Fructus industrialis means it has some human intervention to cultivate the plants. So getting back to our analogy of northern Ohio, which has some good climates for growing grapes for wine, if you're tending to the vineyard, that's fructus industrialis. Whereas if you've got a stand of trees in the backyard like I do, it's fructus naturalis. You will see this on the state examination. Okay? That's part of it. So you need to be able to define, again, the state of Ohio tells us that about 70% of your state examination is terms and terminology. So those of you that have the flashcards, actually use them and review them. And for those of you that do not have flashcards, you can either buy the flashcards or perhaps even better, buy a big stack of blank flashcards, look at every chapter, write the term down on one side of the card, and then flip it over and then write the definition in your own words on the other side. And there's something about the hand-body coordination and focus that'll help you remember that term about 20% better. Either reduce your testing stress 20%, improve your score maybe up to 20% better. Wouldn't you want to do that if you could? And all of you can. So consider either making your own flashcards or reviewing the flashcards that you've got. And as I've said to you in the past classes, if Adele comes out with a new song, you can't listen to it one time and be able to sing it back perfectly and get all the notes and get all the words. It's going to take what? Repetition. You can't listen to me gab today and be able to absorb all the material. You'll be able to do some of that, but you're going to have to put your nose into this textbook. And the biggest issue that I see with students is they're not taking the time to read the material. And that's putting you inherently at risk for failing the examination. Do you realize that this is the last career that you may ever have for the rest of your life? I found this at age 37. I'm now almost 72, starting in May. I'm still doing it, but I read the books. And you're going to need to read these textbooks in order to fully absorb all the stuff. As I've mentioned in the past, one of the biggest things that students realize as they go through these pre-license courses is, wow, I didn't realize that a real estate salesperson had so much stuff they had to learn, which you do. There's a tremendous amount of information that you have to absorb. So invest time in your career by studying these textbooks and reviewing it and rereading it and rereading it and review the terms. Your PowerPoint presentations are available for download if you wish. I don't know that you need to do that, but if you wanted to, as part of your review process, you could do so. But know these terms, fructus naturalis and fructus industrialis. Now, what about some exceptions? And there's always exceptions to almost everything in real estate. So, for example, let's look at the first talking point. Unharvested crops are not included in real property tax assessments because it's an emblement. We'll talk about emblements here in just a moment. So unharvested crops are treated as personal property for tax purposes. So other natural attachments such as crops or timber, wood, trees sold separately from the land become what? Personal property. So just think about that, and then let's get into this thing about emblements. Now, this is something that you're probably going to see on the state examination. So let's talk about it. By the way, we'll take a break about every hour and 15 minutes, give or take. So we'll probably take our first break sometime after 9 o'clock, just to let you know. So what about tenant farmers? You know, a lot of farms today, it is so expensive. Whoops, hang on a second. I just lost my chat. Hang on, let me take a peek here. Okay. Now we got it back. All right. Sorry about that. Sometimes it just disappears on me, and then I don't know if you're asking a question in chat or not. So what about a tenant farmer? My grandfather had a farm on the southwest side of Franklin County in Galloway, and had a big farm and had 8 children, 5 boys and 3 girls, and they farmed the land, and they had livestock and they had crops. And he was a true farmer. He had the equipment and he had the manpower with himself and with the equipment and with his children, who became teenagers and then adults, to work the land. So the crops that they had were their crops on their land. Now today, because of the expense of all this equipment being enormously expensive, what you now see is a lot of farmers that have the land, but they don't actually farm the land. They will contract with a tenant farmer. And there's actually, I've seen some television shows on this whole thing where these tenant farmers go from farm to farm, county to county, state to state, and they will plant the crops in the spring, and then move on to the next farm and plant those crops, and so forth and so on. And then when it comes time to harvest, they will go back and repeat the process. And these are what we call tenant farmers. Now, a tenant farmer will probably have some sort of a written agreement with the farmer that owns the land that when they harvest the crops, they're going to divvy up the profits, whatever way they're going to divvy it up. That would be a tenant farmer. But the tenant farmer has rights under Ohio law. So it's called, what we call it is the doctrine of emblements. Doctrine of emblements. And that's another one of those key terms that you're going to need to remember for the state examination. So if a tenant farmer, planted the crops, whatever they might be, that tenant farmer has the right to come back in to harvest the crops, even if the tenant farmer relationship ends. Excuse me. So let's say that the agreement runs out in May. They've already planted the crops in April and May, but their agreement runs out in the end of May, and they're not going to harvest until late summer. The tenant farmer still has the rights to go in and harvest what he or she planted. So be aware of that. Review these notes in your textbook. But a tenant farmer does have the right that if they put it in the ground, they can get it out of the ground. So and typically these agreements between the farmer and the tenant farmer, the people that have all the equipment, is typically for an indefinite period of time. But if the agreement is terminated through no fault of the tenant farmer before the crop is ready to harvest, they can still go back in and harvest the crop. That's the doctrine of emblements. So that's one, in fact, that's on page 144 in the left column. Any questions about that before we move on? We good? All right. So I can get the mouse to move. There we go. Now, these, what they call tips from an agent, this is something new in this textbook. That is, they don't have these in the textbook. So it's something that is in the PowerPoint. It is worth your time to review this. So I'm going to be quiet for just a moment. Take the time to read this regarding tenant farmers. And again, typically everything that's contractual should be reduced to writing, W-R-I-T-I-N-G, writing, so that you can prove what was agreed to. Under Ohio statute of frauds, contracts must be in writing to be enforceable. And if they're not, you just can't go into a courtroom and say, well, they said they were going to do this, and they come back and said, no, we didn't say that. And the court's going to say, well, where's the writing? Where's the proof? And there is no writing, there's no contract, there's no written agreement. The court's not going to enforce anything because it's oral testimony. It's not provable. It's a he said, or she said, or whatever. So you've got to, so these agreements with these tenant farmers are fairly complex because they're very specific to protect both the landowner, the farmer that owns the farm, as well as the tenant farmer that's planting and harvesting the crops. So now let's talk about a fixture. Now, and I know this is probably not going to sound that dramatic, but to me, this is pretty dramatic. You go into a hardware store Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards, Ace, True Value, your neighborhood hardware store. You go into a Meijer store or a Target or whatever, and you can buy a kitchen faucet. That kitchen faucet is personal property. You can buy it, walk out the store with it. It is personal property. Now, the moment you install it into the kitchen sink, it magically transforms from personal property into what? A fixture. Now, that may not sound that dramatic, and it's like, yeah, fine, so what? Well, it magically transforms from personal property into a fixture for real estate. It becomes part of the real property. So I just had my furnace and air conditioning system replaced 4 years ago. Our house is 32 years old, going on 33 years old, and we had it for about 27, 28 years, and we had it maintained. By the way, always maintain your equipment. So for air conditioning and furnace systems, you do typically a spring air conditioning tune-up and a fall furnace tune-up. Advise your buyers to always do that. Get 2 tune-ups a year. That helps preserve the life of the equipment, make sure it's running efficiently. You'll typically get a discount on parts if you need a specific part or it's starting to wear out. And you typically also get priority service in case of a major outage. You know, when we go from summer and nice temperatures to cold, the furnace companies are blasted with a lot of requests for service because they find out that their furnace doesn't work. Well, if your furnace goes out during one of those times, you'll get priority service, typically from the contractor. Is it an expense that the consumer needs to pay as part of home ownership? They don't have to, but they should. So these are some of the tips that you can educate your buyers with to make sure that they maintain their property. So when you've got this furnace and air conditioning sitting in a warehouse, it's a piece of personal property. It's not a fixture. But once it's installed in the home, it becomes a fixture. And in a real estate purchase contract, at least the ones that I've seen here in Ohio and with Columbus Realtors and with my own contract here, my company, there's a whole section that identifies what are fixtures, which include, so in other words, it's codified, it's written into the contract, so there's no ambiguity as to what it is. Again, being in writing makes it enforceable if you have to go to court. So that personal property, when it becomes installed into the property, becomes real property. And they give you some examples there on the slide. So one of the things that the Supreme Court of Ohio looked at was, what is the method of annexation? How was it attached? Sometimes there is disputes about what is considered to be an attachment and real property versus personal property. So consider this. You've got a water conditioning system that you want to install in your home that gets soft water instead of hard water. A lot of people do that. It's a piece of personal property. You install it into the home, typically with a plumber, but could a homeowner do it themselves? Yeah, they could. Does that become real property at that point? What do you all think? What do you think? Anybody have an idea? So you're saying yes? So, and then Justin says depends on the intention when installed. So, Justin, let me ask you a question. I'm not putting you on the spot. I just want to get your ideas. Would you install a water softening system with the idea that you're going to take it out when you leave as the owner? Is that reasonable? Would you think that's reasonable that somebody could just install and plumb in this water softener and then take it back? By the way, I'm 3/4 of a mile north of the Worthington Fire Department, so if you hear sirens in the background, I apologize. But hopefully there's somebody, they're rescuing somebody. Hopefully my building isn't catching fire. That would be bad. By the way, if I ever disappear, if I lose internet or something happens or I lose power, don't leave the classroom. Don't log out because then you will not get credit for today's session. If we run out of power or if the internet goes out, I'll call Kaylee, our live stream administrator, give her an update what's going on, and she will announce to the class what you're going to do. But just don't leave. That's very bad. And sometimes when we do lose connection or whatever, it's just a matter of either rebooting or whatever. Um, but anyway, just FYI. So, all right. So now Kimberly says, what about if it's leased?